Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Politics of Latin America and the Caribbean. I am Dr. Nicole Warmington Granston. Today, we'll be discussing Latin America and economic globalization. So, what we'll be covering today is defining globalization, discussing major trading agreements that have been covered and how effective it has been for economic development, talk about the varied views about economic globalization across the region, as well as talk about other transnational issues that affect Latin America. So, what is globalization? Globalization is a multidimensional process involving economic integration that is focused on trade and capital flows, political change that is looking at reduced state control, cultural exchanges where we're going to interconnected societies, and even technological connectivity. At its core, we should know that globalization integrates national economies into the global market. It increases interdependence between countries, and it exposes local economies to international competition. So what we find is that globalization links Latin America to the world, but it also increases vulnerability. It should be noted that globalization is not new to Latin America. Latin America has been a part of the global economy since the 19th century, especially as an exporter of raw materials. We know that the region has actually experienced or has been shaped by three major developmental models or development models. The first being outward development, which occurred between 1880 and 1940, which was focused on export-led growth based on classic economics and free markets. Then the second was inward development that happened between the 1940s and the 1970s, where Latin America practiced import substitution, industrialization, and there was strong state intervention. And then since the 1980s, the region has been following what we know as the market-oriented model, which is focused on neoliberal reforms and pushing trade liberalization and privatization. So we know that globalization in Latin America reflects this long history of shifting economic strategies. Now, what effects have globalization had on the region? There have been some positive effects. We've seen an increase in trade and foreign investment. We've seen growth in industries like manufacturing, which the maquiladoras practice. We've seen a growth in tourism, in natural products and exports, and we've also seen greater integration into global markets. The negative effect, however, is that we've seen persistent inequality, limited poverty reduction, economic vulnerability, dependence on external markets, and the growth of the informal market or economy. So, what we get from this is that globalization produces growth, but not broad development. Now, why have these results been disappointing? We know that despite reforms, growth has been slow and unstable. Income gaps with wealthy countries have widened, macroeconomic stability remains fragile, and inequality persists across the region. As a result, we find that Latin America has lagged behind regions like East Asia in reaping benefits from globalization. To fully benefit from globalization, we know that the region has to do things that would allow them to benefit more. Some of the core requirements would have to be strong institutions, open but regulated markets, and continued structural reforms. But Latin America also needs to experience deeper changes. This includes investment in education and skills, technological innovation, workforce training, and inclusion of civil society in policymaking. So what we find is that economic openness alone is not enough. Development requires institutional strength and human capital. Now we'll talk about some of the trade agreements and regional blocs. And we'll start off by talking about NAFTA. Now, NAFTA, which was known as the North American Free Trade Agreement and is now known as USMCA, reduced tariffs on 99% of the goods that were traded between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. What we saw happening as a result of that was an increase in trade between these three countries. NAFTA and even USMCA today is driven largely by corporate interests, and it does not include the free movement of labor. The major criticism of NAFTA/USMCA is that it led to job losses in the United States. It led to environmental concerns arising in Mexico as plants move there, and it also led to unequal benefits among the countries. The next major project that was tried within the region was known as FTAA, or the Free Trade Areas of the Americas. This was actually very much a failed project. Now, what it proposed was to have a hemisphere-wide free trade agreement from as far north as Canada all the way to Chile and Argentina. However, this failed because of lack of cooperation between the United States and many Latin American countries. Now, we've seen that there have been alternative regional efforts where countries are part of multiple regional organizations. Some of these alternative regional efforts have included Mercosur, ALBA, the Andean Community, and CAFTA, and I'd like to include CARICOM, which includes most of the English-speaking Caribbean, as well as Haiti and Suriname. Now, these regional efforts, they aim to increase regional cooperation, reduce dependence on the United States, and even to promote economic autonomy. Now, what are some of the other major transnational challenges that are faced in the region? The first is that we know that globalization intensifies cross-border issues, and this can be much related to migration. Now, the cause of migration out of Latin America has been poverty and violence. The effects on the region has been there are remittances that help to support families back in the home countries in Latin America, but this has also led to brain drain, where the smartest minds, those who are most educated, are leaving the region, putting Latin America and the Caribbean in a precarious position because we need these minds to help to foster development. We've also seen another transnational challenge being that of health. We've seen across Latin America and the Caribbean that there's been progress in disease control, but they're now facing new challenges, being exposed to diets that were not originally from the region, which has led to obesity, diabetes, and we've also seen emerging diseases like Zika that are mosquito-borne that have affected, children and pregnant women. There's also climate change. The region is highly vulnerable to hurricanes, flooding, and El Nino, and we know that disasters create long-term economic damages. So, what we know that there's two main arguments that we can take away from looking at economic globalization and Latin America. Latin America is deeply integrated into the global economy, but this integration has historically been unequal and dependent. Second, globalization has not solved structural problems. There's still inequality, weak institutions, and volatility still persists. All we know is that globalization has actually connected Latin America to the world economy and created opportunities for growth, but without strong institutions and social investment, it has largely reproduced inequality, dependency, rather than delivering broad-based development. Thank you.